Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I finished my ranking of all 33 novel adaptations from the Poirot series starring David Suchet as the world's greatest detective, Hercule Poirot. This video concludes my list with the top 11 episodes. Fair warning, I will be spoiling both these episodes and the novels, especially any changes that were made. Starting with number 11 is a bit of a strange one to me, and that is Three Act Tragedy. And this episode changed almost nothing from the novel, so it was difficult for me to judge because I've mostly been analyzing these episodes on the changes that were made. So this episode, which almost no changes happened, was hard to assess. The only material differences is that the episode cuts Angela Sutcliffe and Mr. Satterthwaite, the latter of whom was expected. The series often cuts recurring characters from Christie's other works, and as Mr. Satterthwaite comes from the Harley Quinn collection, it just made sense. Everything Mr. Satterthwaite does in the novel, Poirot does in this episode, which just makes more sense overall. It is a Poirot-centric series after all. I found this episode to be fantastic, as I often do, even with the sometimes questionable changes in others. I think this plot works better in a visual format. I was a little critical of the novel, but when visualizing it, I just think everything falls into place smoother. I have very little to say because of how few changes were made, but it is a fantastic adaptation overall, so it comes in here at number 11. At number 10 is an adaptation that greatly improved on the novel, The Mystery of the Blue Train. I love all the changes that were made here. The novel is full of mundane plots and just really boring sequences that don't go anywhere, but the adaptation gives us an almost classic noir train film that is enjoyable from start to finish. There are a number of necessary changes. I think the expansion of Mirel's character is a good one to start with. She's much more prominent and interesting here, where she is now Rufus Van Alden's mistress, and Van Alden's wife is actually still alive and in a sanitarium, which is a plot device borrowed from several other Christie stories, but I don't mind that it's here as well. It works very well. I think the Catherine Gray slash the Tamplin storyline is much better incorporated into the story, with Lennox in particular becoming a great character. There's a lot of effort into making the story more intimate and secluded amongst the characters than it is in the novel, where everything is just so wide open. Even the handling of the jewel theft seems to be so much more grounded and believable in the adaptation. I love the changes that were made to Ada Mason and Major Knighton, who seem so much more personable people. Knighton falls for Catherine Gray, which prompts Ada Mason to try to kill Catherine, which is a great scene that concludes with Lennox biting her on the neck. And all this happens while Derek Kettering is in jail already, having been arrested for murdering his wife. So this is such a big wrench in their plans. I think the conclusion is fantastic, where Poirot gathers everyone on the train, and we have the traditional denouement that the novel was lacking and ends with Knighton jumping in front of the train. I find this episode to be such a huge improvement on the book that I had to put it this high here at number 10. At number 9 is the adaptation that moved up the most from its novel ranking, and that is Third Girl. I was very impressed with what the series did with this story, which is one of my least favorite Christie novels. It dispensed with so much nonsense from the book, changed it considerably, yet maintained the overall atmosphere and plot of the original book. The biggest issues have been eliminated, including but not limited to Frances Carey masquerading as Mary Restorick and this going unnoticed, Norma being drugged at convenient times, Norma being kidnapped by Dr. Stillingfleet, and changing the murder victim. The victim is now Nanny Seagram, Norma's former nanny, although she just basically serves the same role as Louise did in the novel. I love this change because it brings Norma into the situation much more believably, and the stakes are higher for her and for Poirot. Norma's blackouts are also better. They are now caused by the trauma of witnessing her mother commit suicide by slitting her wrists in the bathtub, and both Andrew Restrick and Frances Carey do a good job of inflicting this trauma onto Norma. There's a new subplot where we learn Frances is actually Norma's half sister via Andrew and her former teacher, and I love this change as well. I think all of these things collectively make the situation much more dire for Norma, which was something the novel was really lacking, as I didn't feel like there was any motivation for Norma to be so ingrained into things. Norma is still aloof and still misses some obvious things, but there is now a justifiable reason for it. They got rid of the weird kidnapping, and now Norma winds up with David, who survives in this story. And we still have the delightful Zoe Wanamaker as Ariane Oliver and her antics with Poirot that are a lot of fun. I was very impressed with this episode, so I have Third Girl here at number 9. Number 8, again, an episode that solves some of the problems I have with the novel, and that is Sad Cypress. And I'll start off by commending the cast here. I typically find the cast of these episodes to be fantastic, but this one really stands out to me. Elizabeth Dermot Walsh, Rupert Penry Jones, and Kelly Riley really are fantastic as that love trial of Eleanor, Roddy, and Mary. But for me, what sets this one to the top is they fill the very obvious plot holes from the novel. Here, Eleanor makes a big deal over how she doesn't like tea, which allows Nurse Hopkins to poison Mary in the tea, and while this does seem odd, it is a much necessary fix. The reveal that Mary is actually Mrs. Wellman's daughter is also much better incorporated into the story, rather than having Nurse Hopkins blab about it to Poirot for no reason. Poirot is now in the thick of the action from the beginning, and this allows him to actually solve the murders via deduction rather than being told clues in a passive manner. He tastes the sandwich paste, he reads the poison pen letter, he is much more active in Eleanor's defense. I love the trap he sets at the end for Nurse Hopkins, where they have this intense face off, and she thinks she has poisoned Poirot, only for Poirot to have turned the tables on her and expose herself by admitting she needs the antidote to save her life. From start to finish, Sad Cypress is a marvelous episode that dramatically improves upon the novel, so it comes in here at number 8. At number 7 is a huge one, and that is Murder on the Orient Express. And I was pleasantly surprised the first time I watched this adaptation. This novel has been adapted to death, and it really has become trite in my opinion, but I love everything the series did here. They put so much effort and concern into every little moment. I think the overarching dilemma of should Poirot let the passengers free or not is so beautifully executed here, and I think the Poirot adaptation does it better than any other Murder on the Orient Express adaptation. It's on your mind the entire episode, and this is really the only Poirot they can do this. The show assumes most of its audience knows the solution already, so it creates the suspense in a different manner. It starts out with Poirot witnessing the brutal stoning of an adulteress, and that is on his mind the entire film. The emotions just run rampant throughout, and it culminates in the ending where it really does seem like Poirot is going to tell the police the truth. And he just doesn't, but is very reluctant to do so. And the conclusion here is fantastic. It's so dramatic and quite frankly shocking, even though this happens in almost every adaptation of the novel. There are some minor changes made, like Cyrus Hardman being cut and replaced with Dr. Constantine, which is fine. The reason why I don't have it higher on the list is just a matter of personal preference. I think the top 7 episodes are extremely good, so I'm more or less just nitpicking to order them, and Murder on the Orient Express fell a little short, but it does come in here at number 7. Number 6 is the first novel the show adapted, Peril at End House. And I love this episode. It's an early one, so we have the full cast of Poirot, Hastings, Japp, and Miss Lemon, and all of them bring so much to the episode. I especially love the seance sequence with Miss Lemon pretending to be the medium, and she's supposed to be this expert into the occult, but she really has no clue on the subject, and this is all a lot of fun. I also like how Nick's fake death is withheld from the audience in this version. In the novel, we know that Nick isn't really dead, but that is not the case here, and it works very effectively. It really eliminates the possibility of Nick being the killer. The episode also dispatches with all the nonsense surrounding Freddy's husband, which I think is for the better. There really aren't many other changes from the original novel, and what is changed is just fantastic. Like I said earlier, this is the first full length novel to be adapted, and the Christie estate was very leery of adaptations, so it makes sense that we're very careful with this one, and I think it pays off big time. So I have Peril at End House here at number 6. At number 5 is the novel that I think is probably the best suited Poirot for to be adapted, and that is The ABC Murders. And the tension and action of this story is so much more heightened than it was in the book. Here, these murders occur within days of each other, not months, and it happens in such quick succession that it's absolutely engrossing. It is such a thrilling roller coaster ride of an episode. A lot of these extraneous police characters were cut, and in general, the action is much more centralized amongst Poirot, his inner circle, and the family of the victims. Yet we still have this foreboding atmosphere that the world's safety lies solely in Poirot's hands. It's a murder plot on a large scale, yet close-knit, and the show pulls this off fantastically. The Tom and Lily side plot of them discovering Cust is deleted, and this is distributed elsewhere. Overall, this adaptation is a lot less whiplashly than I thought the book was, and although I could have done without the Poirot patented chase scene at the end, I don't think that really distracts from this episode in any way. So I have the ABC murders here at number 5. At number 4 is an adaptation of a novel that grows on me every time I read it and every time I watch the adaptation, and that is The Hollow. And what I dislike about the Hollow novel is still present in the adaptation. There is still this heavy handed, romantic, moody atmosphere and all this talk about who loves whom, but in the adaptation, this is brilliantly presented. The Gerda, John, Henrietta love triangle is so palpable and juicy, I just can't get enough of it. It's just my preference to have this kind of story in a visual form rather than in print. And I also think the adaptation comes across as far less of a romance film than the novel does as a romance book. The mystery atmosphere is constant in the episode, and everyone's relationships are far better integrated into the murder plot. I just love the scene where John meets with Veronica Cray, and they have some very passionate and steamy sex. And this is not implied at all. The show is very bold in showing exactly what they are doing, and is a little bit of a shock. The novel was published in 1946, where this was just very lightly implied, but the adaptation came out in 2004, where this could be shown. I remember the first time I watched this episode and being stunned at this scene, but it really changes things for me because in the novel, Gerda's motive for killing John seems a little silly to me because we don't know what actually happened between John and Veronica that night, and Gerda comes across as flighty, but here she comes across as a vengeful woman, and I like this Gerda a lot more. In the novel, I think we're supposed to believe she's not as aloof as she seems, but I never received that impression, but I do in the episode. And it's all for the better. The Hollow is a fantastic episode for the series, so I placed it here at number 4. And now for the top 3. And these weren't definitive for me. I knew the top 7 or so would be the top, but I didn't really have a set order until I thought about it more. But at number 3, I do have Dead Man's Folly, which was the last episode filmed but not aired. And I think the novel has a lot of minor issues that aren't well defined. There's just something about it that doesn't work well, but I do think the episode works brilliantly. This is the last time we have Ariadne Oliver, and the show has a lot of fun with her. There are so many scenes with Poirot and Mrs. Oliver, mostly serving as a fond farewell, where we just see them engaged in so much delightful banter between them. The plot is largely left intact, but all of the odd things that didn't quite fit in have been removed, and the plot runs so much smoother than it did in the novel. We don't really have that political communist nonsense surrounding Alec Ledge or the man with the turtle shirts, but I think it's the ending of this episode that propels it high up on the list. The novel ending just sort of ends without giving us any definite answers as to what's going to happen to Sir George and Mrs. Folliot. Here, it starts off the same way with Poirot confronting Mrs. Folliot about what she knew and how she covered up her son's murder plot, but the episode continues on afterward, and we witness Mrs. Folliot confront Sir George and demands he listen to her for the first time in his life. Together, they either commit suicide via gunshot or Mrs. Folliot kills Sir George, then herself. We don't know which it is because it's not shown other than the two gunshots being heard. And this is so much better of an ending and much more fitting one for Poirot, who often lets the criminals take this way out. It feels appropriate and necessary. I think Dead Man's Folly is one of the best adaptations the Poirot series did, but it only comes in here at number 3. Now, for number 2 is the adaptation that was simply brilliant and avoided what I think could have been a very boring episode, and that is Five Little Pigs. And the way the novel is structured, where we hear the same story over and over again, means this episode could have been dull. However, the production value of this one is superb, and it presents the story in such a brilliant, fascinating manner. But even beyond the way the story is told, there are a few changes here that really bring out the best of the book. Caroline has now been executed for the murder of Amyas Crale instead of dying in prison, and we see this moment at the very beginning, and immediately the drama is palpable and the plot serious. Poirot now has to deliver justice for a woman wrongly executed, rather than simply wrongly convicted. The stakes are higher and make for better TV already. Another positive change is that Philip Blake, played excellently by Toby Stephens, is now in love with Ammius, not Caroline. And normally the show did insert these gay characters or subplots very clunkily, and it seemed they were only doing it to be trendy. But in this case, it is not played for jokes. It is very serious and very well incorporated. It's also textual. This is sort of implied in the original novel, and although Christie later says Philip was in love with Caroline, she really couldn't write otherwise in 1942, but I actually think this makes more sense. His hatred of Caroline stems from his love of Ammius and the way she treated him, not his unrequited love for Caroline. I also think the ending is better, where Elsa Greer still escapes justice, but we do have a dramatic ending where Carla, who is renamed Lucy in the episode, threatens to shoot her to avenge her mother, only for Poirot to talk her out of it. And this scene is one of the best in the series because everyone present knows the only way Elsa is going to be punished is if Lucy shoots her, because there's nothing the law can do about it. But overall, this is one of the best adaptations of any Christie story of any series, but it is not the best one from the Poirot series, so it comes in here at number 2. And now for the top spot, the only adaptation that made me cry, and that is Curtain. This one is almost entirely faithful to the novel. The only changes are eliminating some of those pre-story murders Norton was responsible for, and Margaret Litchfield being hanged, which is a similar change the show made in Five Little Pigs. Again, it works better. It provides more motivation for the characters and a better backstory for Elizabeth Cole. The other change is that there's a significant toning down of a lot of the uncomfortable talk about eugenics and that sort of thing. It is still present somewhat, but it's toned down quite a bit, and I think this was a good choice. But what makes this episode the best for me is the emotions. All of the actors just absolutely nail their characters. They are exactly as how I read them on the page. The emotions just hit very deeply with this one. There's so much sadness, and Poirot's death scene is fantastically executed, both from Suchet's acting and a lot of the camera work and music and the writing. It's one of the best death scenes in all of television history. Hugh Fraser is fantastic as Hastings. He nails his roles as both Poirot's assistant, who is mishandled and betrayed, as well as this helpless father to Judith. Helen Baxendale is also fantastic as Elizabeth Cole, a character who I didn't feel popped in the novel, but she was so good here. To see her sort of mooning around miserably the whole episode really puts her character into perspective for me. I understand her character better and the ghosts that linger in her past more in this episode than I did on the page. It would be remiss of me not to mention Aidan McArdle, who plays Norton to perfection here. He plays the role of X just brilliantly. It's everything I wanted from him. And I know I said my criteria is mostly on the changes made, but I just cannot ignore how brilliant this episode is from the acting and the production perspectives. This episode was nominated for an Emmy Award, and although it did not win, it certainly would have been a winner in my book. It's clearly the best episode of the entire series for me, so Curtain comes in at number 1. And that's it for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Next week, I'm covering more Christie adaptations with the Miss Marple novel adaptations from the ITV series Agatha Christie's Marple, starring both Geraldine McEwen and Julia Mackenzie. The next video will have all 12 full-length novel adaptations, and the video after that will have the 11 remaining episodes, which are a combination of non-Marple stories they inserted Miss Marple into, and a few of the short stories they did adapt. I felt it just made more sense to split them up like this, so the next video has all the Marple novels. Until next time, Mystery Files.